The bruise wasn't the kind you photograph for court. It wasn't blue or bleeding or grotesque. It was small, light purple where yellow threatened to take over. Faint, really, but unmistakable. I noticed it the moment Ivy reached for her coat, her sleeve slipping up just enough for me to see her elbow. She didn't react, didn't wince, just kept moving like it wasn't even there. But I saw it, and I knew. Kids don't get bruises like that from playing. Not in that spot, not that shape, and not on a day when she'd come home quieter than usual, her backpack unzipped, and her drawing book missing a page. That page mattered, because the next morning we were invited, no, summoned, into the Faulkners' home. And standing in their pristine living room, beneath the white crown molding and beside the vase of impossible flowers, I watched my daughter, Ivy, being told to apologize to the boy who hit her. "Say you're sorry to Miles," Judith Faulkner said. Sipping tea like this was some kind of etiquette lesson instead of a veiled threat. Ivy looked at me, her eyes wide, frightened, confused. She whispered, "But I didn't do anything." "She provoked him," Judith replied, her voice as polished as the marble floor. I stood there, silent at first, staring at the woman who had once been my closest friend. The woman who hosted baby showers with caterers, who sent handwritten thank yous from a branded stationery line we designed together. The same woman who was now calmly justifying her son pinching my daughter hard enough to leave a mark. And that's when it happened. Not an outburst, not a breakdown, a crystallization. Something in me sharpened. A rage so quiet it could cut glass. They had always seen me as soft, malleable. Delilah, the illustrator, the agreeable one, the woman who painted storybooks and kept the peace. But they forgot something critical. Even gentle creatures become dangerous when their children are threatened. I didn't say a word. Not to Judith. Not to her husband. Not to Miles, still perched on the sofa, with that smug little smile that made my stomach turn. I simply took Ivy's hand and walked out. Judith didn't follow us. That would have been off script, but she stared after me like she couldn't believe I had the nerve. And maybe she couldn't. Maybe she thought I'd sit there and accept the script she handed me, like I always had before. Let Ivy apologize to smooth things over. Let their family come out looking respectable. But this time, I chose something different. I chose my daughter. We walked to the car in silence. Ivy's hand in mine felt impossibly small, but steady. She looked up at me once we buckled in. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said, "but they are." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, the house wrapped in silence. Not peace, just stillness. The kind that comes before a storm. I replayed the scene over and over. The bruise, the apology, Judith's controlled voice. That white living room where truth got erased and replaced with whatever made them feel comfortable. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files. 10 years of work. Branding. Design. Books. The very projects that built Judith's publishing empire, the Faulkner series. All of it carried my fingerprints, my art, my style, my concepts. But my name? Nowhere visible. Not on the covers. Not in the press. I'd been credited on internal memos, email threads, contracts. But to the world, I was invisible. She'd let me believe that was fine. That it was normal. That being part of something bigger was reward enough. And I let her, because that's what women like me are taught to do. Be grateful. Be agreeable. Don't cause waves. But that night, I made a different choice. Not to shout. Not to beg. To build. To rise. 2 days later, I launched a site. Nothing flashy. Just a simple domain. DelilahDraws.com. It featured a gallery of my illustrations, the same ones that had once lived in Judith's books, now stripped of her titles, free of her name. Alongside them, a blog post, The Cost of Silence. It didn't name her. It didn't have to. It simply told the story of a mother watching her daughter be told to apologize for surviving someone else's violence, and the decision she made to no longer participate in that silence. The post exploded. Emails poured in. Comments. Shares. Women from all industries, designers, teachers, nurses, full-time moms, all telling me the same thing. This happened to me too. I wish I'd walked out when I had the chance. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. But the best part, 2 publishers reached out within 48 hours. They'd seen my art, really seen it, finally, and wanted to collaborate. No middlewoman. No filters. No Judith. Ivy watched me reply to the emails at the kitchen table. She asked, "Are you working with them now?" I smiled. No, they're working with me. Because that's the part Judith never saw coming. She thought her power came from being feared, from being first, from being followed. But mine came from walking away, from knowing what I was worth and no longer asking for permission to claim it. 2 days. That's all it took for them to realize what they'd lost. And they haven't even seen the whole storm yet. If you've ever been made to feel small, like your story didn't matter, this one's for you. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel for the next chapter. Because what comes after silence is clarity. The ripple effect started slowly. An unfollow here. An unsubscribed newsletter there. A whisper at a dinner table. A pause in a hallway conversation when Judith walked in. And then it grew. Because truth spreads quietly at first, but once it finds air, it roars. The blog post didn't just go viral. It opened a wound Judith couldn't close. And she tried. Of course she did. First came the damage control. Her team pushed out a glossy article about her journey as a woman founder, conveniently skipping the parts where she erased the women who helped her build it. Then came the passive-aggressive posts. Gratitude is so underrated in this industry. Sometimes loyalty means staying silent for the good of the work. They were thinly veiled, transparent to anyone paying attention. But the worst part, she still didn't get it. She thought I'd come for her reputation. I hadn't. I was simply reclaiming mine. Ivy was home from school the next day when we got a hand-delivered envelope, thick cardstock, elegant handwriting, an invitation to the launch of Judith's newest book. I turned it over in my hands like it was covered in rust. The gall, the nerve, the arrogance. Part of me wanted to toss it in the trash. But another part, the colder, calculating part, saw the opportunity. She was still playing chess with an old board. She hadn't realized I'd flipped the table. I went. Of course I did. Not because I needed to be seen, but because I wanted her to see me. And she did. The moment I walked into that bookstore, Judith's smile froze just slightly. It was fast, a flicker like static. But I caught it. I wore no makeup. My hair in a bun. Simple blouse. A jacket I'd owned for 5 years. I didn't need the performance. I was the message. She greeted me like we were old friends. Hugged me for the cameras. I hugged her back. Because a picture says 1,000 words, and so does a silence stretched across a polite smile. The event unfolded as expected. Judith read an excerpt, laughed at her own lines, talked about empathy like it was a brand. She thanked the illustrators, plural, none named. She didn't mention me, but the audience did. One woman raised her hand during the Q&A and asked, "Did Delilah illustrate this one too?" Judith blinked. "Delilah and I have collaborated in the past." She said, "Tight. But this project was in-house." I just watched. Let her squirm. Let her feel, for the first time, what it's like to be questioned. Afterward, I slipped out before the book signing. I had no interest in her signature. I had my own stories to tell now, and I was already writing them. The first publishing offer came 3 days later. A children's press based in Oregon, run by women, run with integrity. They didn't want just my illustrations. They wanted my voice. Write the story too, the editor said. Your words carry just as much weight. So I did. A picture book about a girl who grows flowers in places no one expects, who learns that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. It sold before it was printed. They called it Gentle Defiance. I called it healing. Meanwhile, the emails kept coming. Other illustrators, former assistants, freelancers, editors, people Judith had underpaid, overworked, and then erased. They told me their stories. I told them they weren't alone. I started sharing them anonymously, respectfully, through a weekly newsletter called The Quiet Exit, and it took off because people were starving for honesty, for a space where they didn't have to perform gratitude while being stepped on. Judith hated it. She never responded publicly, but her circle started thinning. The influencers stopped tagging her. The publishers stopped calling her a visionary. She posted fewer selfies, more quotes about letting go and knowing your worth. And still, she didn't apologize. Not to me, not to Ivy, because to Judith, an apology was a loss. But I wasn't waiting for one. I was too busy creating something better. My second book, my first solo author/illustrator work, was already in development. It was about a mother bear who walks away from the forest council when they tell her to quiet down. It was for Ivy, and for me, and for every woman who'd ever been asked to be small, soft, and silent to make someone else feel tall. The day we signed the contract, I picked Ivy up from school early, took her to the ice cream shop by the park, sat on the bench, and watched her draw on a napkin. She showed it to me. It was a girl with a cape and a bear beside her. "That's you," she said. And me. I didn't cry. I smiled because she saw it, and I knew one thing for certain. She would never be taught to apologize for someone else's harm again. Judith didn't come for me directly. That wasn't her style. She came sideways. 2 months after my second book was announced, a message showed up in my inbox from a name I didn't recognize. A freelance editor, she claimed, said she'd heard I was hiring and wanted to know if I'd consider a collaboration. Said she'd worked with several high-profile publishers, and then casually dropped Judith's company name in the third paragraph. She included links to samples. They were clean, professional, polished in all the right ways, and cold. I declined. 2 days later, a blog post surfaced online about divisive narratives in the children's publishing space. The language was vague, but the subtext was crystal clear. It talked about female creatives weaponizing emotion, and how cancel culture was destroying legacies built on hard work. No names were used, but I didn't have to be told who wrote it, or why. Judith had made a career of control, controlling narratives, relationships, reputations. And now that control was slipping. She wasn't spiraling. Not yet. But she was reacting, which meant she was afraid. And fear makes people sloppy. That's when the phone call came. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Delilah, Judith's voice said, warm and cautious, like we were in a coffee shop and not on opposite sides of a quiet war. "I heard about your new book. Congratulations." I said nothing. She continued, "Ivy must be so proud of you." Still, I didn't respond. Judith took a breath, one of those deep, pressurized inhales that always came before she got down to business. "I think we should talk," she said. "Clear the air. It's gotten loud." There it was. The real reason. It wasn't about me. It was about optics. I let her speak. She painted the usual picture. misunderstandings, miscommunications, mutual respect. She mentioned our shared history and how she always valued my talent. And then she said the part that told me everything I needed to know. I just don't think it's healthy for either of us to keep dragging this out in public. That was it. That was the crack. Judith thought this was about her, that everything I had done, the books, the website, the newsletter, the growing community of silence creatives, was just fallout from hurt feelings. She still didn't understand. This wasn't about one bruise. It wasn't about one moment in her white living room. It wasn't even about Ivy. It was about truth. And the way truth, once named, reshapes everything around it. So I said what I hadn't said that day in her house. I'm not dragging this out, Judith. I'm building something. You're just mad that you're not part of it. She paused. Then, quietly, that's not fair. Neither was letting my daughter apologize to the boy who hurt her. Silence. Longer than I expected. Then, her voice, smaller. Delilah, we were trying to protect our son. I felt a deep stillness roll through me. You should have protected mine, too, I said, but she was a girl, so she got told to swallow it. Smile. Say sorry. You're not a victim. No, I said, I'm a mirror. And I hung up. I stood there afterward, phone still in my hand, heart beating hard but steady. That wasn't closure. That was clarity. And I needed it because what came next was bigger than Judith. The publisher had greenlit a full series, a line of books centered on quiet power, designed to help kids understand boundaries, voice, and courage, especially when the world tells them to be polite instead. They gave me full creative control. Writing, illustration, art direction, and a seat on the executive board. The first of its kind, a creative-first imprint, led by women and built to center underrepresented voices from the ground up. I named it Echo and Ember because truth echoes, and it only takes a spark to burn the whole lie down. Ivy helped design the logo, a simple open mouth over a flame. She smiled when it was done, so other kids don't have to say sorry for being brave. Exactly that. And brave they were. Submissions flooded in from first-time authors, unagented illustrators, survivors, teachers, immigrant moms writing bedtime stories in second languages. Their work was raw, beautiful, necessary. We published 6 books in the first year. One became a classroom standard, another won a parenting award. But the one that moved me most, a book written by a woman named Nora, soft-spoken, nearly 60, who'd been drawing since she was 6 and never once submitted a manuscript until she read my blog post. She sent me a note after her book launched. They told me I was too quiet to be a storyteller, but you made me believe I could be loud in my own way. That letter's framed on my desk. It sits beside Ivy's sketch of the bear and the girl with the cape. That's the part Judith never understood. Control builds empires, but community builds legacies. And we were building something that would outlive every lie she wrapped in ribbon. By the time Ivy turned 8, Echo and Ember was a full-time studio. We hired a small staff, all of them former freelancers who'd been left behind by bigger houses. We built benefits into contracts. We added mental health days. We made creative ownership standard. Illustrators kept their rights. It was unheard of. It was radical. It was working. A year to the day after I walked out of the Faulkner's house, I got another invitation, this time to a Women in Business panel at a publishing expo. Guess who was listed as keynote? Judith. I declined, and I sent the invite to the trash. Not because I was avoiding her, because I had better things to do. That day, Ivy had her first art show, a school-wide gallery where each student picked one feeling and illustrated it. She chose anger. She drew a volcano with a girl sitting beside it, calm as the sky, while the world mistook her quiet for safety. She won first place. I drove us home with her ribbon in my hand. "You proud of me?" she asked. I looked at her in the rearview mirror and smiled. I've never stopped being proud of you, because she never needed to change. She just needed the world to stop asking her to. And now, she had a mother who would spend the rest of her life making sure no one, no school, no system, no smiling woman in a pristine living room ever told her to apologize for surviving again. The thing about silence is that people mistake it for surrender. They think if you're not speaking, you're not resisting. If you're not reacting, you're retreating. But silence, real silence, the kind that follows trauma, injustice, erasure, that silence isn't passive. It's planning. And eventually, it speaks back in ways the world can't ignore. 1 year after Judith tried to have my daughter apologize for getting hurt, our imprint, Echo and Ember, released its 10th title. It was a collection of illustrated essays from young girls, aged 6 to 16, talking about the first time they were told they were too much, too loud, too sensitive, too assertive, too dramatic. It was called Just Enough. We partnered with 5 school districts and distributed copies to classroom libraries across the state. Within a month, we had a waiting list of educators asking for more. Ivy helped edit it. She insisted we include her friend Maya's piece, a short poem called When They Said Boys Will Be Boys. Ivy didn't just understand the message now. She was living it. She was shaping it. That, more than any sale or award or news headline, was the win. But Judith, she wasn't done. She never would be. That kind of power, brittle and loud, doesn't go quietly. A former colleague emailed me one day, attaching a clip from an industry panel. Judith sitting under stage lights, talking to a polished moderator. When asked about the changes in her brand's direction, she paused, then said, "I think it's important that we, as women, recognize the danger in making everything personal. Not every disagreement is oppression. Sometimes a burned bridge is just ego." The audience nodded politely, but the comments section under the video, that told another story. Funny how the people who erase others' work always say it's not personal. You can't call it a burned bridge if the person you stepped on is building highways now. Say her name, Judith. You owe her that much. That's the thing with truth. Once it's out, you can't bury it again. It surfaces in places you least expect, and it grows. By year 2, Echo and Ember had expanded internationally. Translations, audiobooks, a podcast hosted by one of our authors, book clubs, creative workshops for single mothers and displaced women. And through it all, Ivy watched, not as a bystander, but as a participant. She told her teacher during parent night, "My mom helps people tell the truth when everyone else tells them to stay quiet." I sat in that tiny desk chair, trying not to cry, because she got it, all of it, that moment in Judith's living room, that bruise, that forced apology, the silence I carried home and turned into fire. She saw what it meant, and she was learning how to wield that fire too, not in vengeance, but in vision. One afternoon, Ivy came home with a school flyer for an upcoming family day. There was a talent segment. She asked if she could read something. I said, "Of course. What are you thinking?" She pulled a folded page from her backpack and handed it to me. It was a letter. Short, clear, handwritten in neat, careful print. "Dear Miles, I don't hate you. I hope you learn to be kind. But I'm not sorry for standing up for myself. Even if your mom said I should be. Ivy." I read it twice, my chest rising with something too complex to name. I didn't ask her not to read it. I didn't tell her it might make people uncomfortable, because truth isn't supposed to be polite. It's supposed to be free. And Ivy was free. She read it that Friday in the school auditorium. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. When she was done, the room was quiet for a second too long. And then came the applause. Not a standing ovation, not a theatrical roar, but something better. A room full of adults who understood. Later, I got a message on the parent board. It was from Miles' mother, not Judith, but his stepmother. She wrote, "Ivy is brave. I wish I'd known the whole story back then. Thank you for raising her this way." I didn't respond right away, not because I was bitter, but because it reminded me that not everyone is the villain. Some people are just taught to stay on the wrong side until someone shows them the door out. And sometimes that door is your daughter standing on a stage, reading a letter without anger, just truth. Judith faded from the public eye a little after that. Her social posts turned to gardening, homemade recipes, things no one could comment on. The edges of her brand softened. She began showing up in fewer panels, more reruns than reinventions. Eventually, someone else took over her creative division. The same division I once helped build in silence. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like inevitability, because you can only build a house on a lie for so long before the wind changes. And I became the storm, but not in the way people think. I didn't shout her down. I didn't destroy her business. I didn't campaign to cancel her name. I just told the truth. And truth does the work on its own. It seeps. It echoes. It waits. It teaches. And sometimes it blooms into a girl with a sketchbook and a microphone, teaching a room full of grown-ups what real accountability sounds like. So, yes, they let their son hit my daughter. They told her to apologize. And 2 days later, they thought I walked away in defeat. But what I actually did was begin. And what they lost wasn't just an illustrator. They lost the one person who made their empire mean something. The one who stayed quiet for too long. The one who was watching, remembering, recording every moment she was told to be grateful instead of credited. They thought they were protecting a boy, but I was raising a force. And now, we don't ask to be included. We create our own tables. We build our own teams. We rewrite the rules with ink, with voice, with love that doesn't flinch when power tries to silence it. So if you're listening now, if you've ever sat in a too-white room being told to say sorry when you weren't wrong, if you've been small to make someone else comfortable, if you've ever swallowed your voice to keep the peace, even when that peace came at your own expense, know this: you don't need permission to begin again. You don't need their apology to rise. And you don't need to make yourself smaller to be safe. You are